Okay.
Yeah, on his good days, yeah.
So, good evening once again, Bedford Lunch fans. Tonight on the show, I have with me Save, Les, Ed, and when we were just running out of time on that first program, I believe Les was alluding to a story. He wanted to get in way across town into Fort Garry. When I got there, of course, she didn't have any money.
Really? First time that ever happened?
Yeah, this was a new experience for me, of course. What? No money? But of course, I had a few nasty ideas, but being the nice guy.
Boom.
So what do you got in your purse there? Come on. So she managed to come out with like about $1.60 and change or something. And she says, well,
what was the meter?
Oh, it was about $7, $8, I guess, in those days. So
when $7 or $8 could buy
meant
a
something.
Lincoln Continental.
You could go to Florida on that. So she had a package of cigarettes. She said, well, here, I'll give you this package of cigarettes. I said, okay, how many are in there? 2. Oh, wow. That doesn't go very far. Wow. I said, well, isn't there anybody up in the house? Isn't there any money? No, they're all sleeping. There's no house. So
They're always all
So all of a sudden, I noticed that she had this really beautiful bracelet. It was all made of, turquoise Navajo jewelry, turquoise stones and everything. And I spent some time in Arizona, and I really liked this Navajo jewelry.
Arizona stories later.
Arizona. Speaking of Arizona, I remember what
Arizona story.
But anyways, I said, well, listen, I'll take the bracelet, and then you can bring the money to the office tomorrow, and you'll get your bracelet back. She wouldn't part with that bracelet. No way, that's not going off her arm. So finally, of course, I let her go, giving her the name and address and the phone number and blah, blah, give me the money at the office tomorrow and all this. But, of course, never heard from her again. But that was in summertime. And then in fall, I went back to university, as I was prone to do in those days. And about a month into university, all of a sudden I was at this party with my fellow students. And this girl, I was sitting beside this girl, and she was a good friend of mine in a lot of my classes, and I was sitting there having a drink, and all of a sudden I noticed that she was wearing this fantastic bracelet with turquoise, and I looked at it and I said, I know that bracelet, I said to her. You were the girl in my cab in summertime and you didn't pay. You owe me $7. Come on.
Cough up.
So she says, no kidding, you were the... So she paid me right there.
Really?
She actually brought them because she was all embarrassed because we were good friends already. I'd known her. I'd been a student with her for a couple of months.
That's great. I love
So she upped with the money and paid me. We laughed about that for a while.
I love
I would
stuff
have ripped that thing right off her wrist.
That's a great coincidence.
Yeah, no, I'm too soft.
Are any of you others got good coincidence stories? You know something? Coincidence story? Well, I once drove my...
I have a nice coincidence story. Okay. No, but I already told the story. Maybe it's just someone else.
Oh, it's Zave's turn. Coincidence story.
Oh, no.
Put out that wretched Puerto Rican cigar.
No,
tell a coincidence
Speaking of coincidence stories, there was this... I had this big fat senator in my cab one time.
No senators are fat.
Okay, a small, skinny senator from St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, they're fat, yeah.
And he was a French, from the Cajun country or whatever it is down there.
No Cajun country.
Missouri ain't Cajun country, but we won't correct you. We won't correct you.
All right, well, anyways, he was into French, right? So he'd come up to Canada to check what French people were doing in St. Boniface, And so I had a nice chat with him in a cab. And then he got out. Your cousin. And then the next year I went to Europe, and I happened to be talking to a guy in front of the American Express office in Paris, and I found out he was from St. Louis, Missouri. And so I just off the top of my head, I said, oh, I've never met anybody. Oh, wait a minute, I said. I met one guy from St. Louis, Missouri one time, a senator who was into the French rights of your state there and everything. And it turned out this guy was his next-door neighbor, and he knew this guy really well.
Yeah, that's great.
That's even better.
That's great. Well, I thought I had a good coincidence story. Can I tell it?
Oh, yeah.
No, you can't. This is your program, but it's not your turn.
Well, whose turn is it?
Go ahead.
I took in $80 last night, and it was a real busy night. And one of my trips was, I was up in North Kildonan area, and I never play North Kildonan. I mean, if I have a trip up there, I hightail it back downtown or to Fort Rouge, but I stayed there for a little while. I got a trip.
You're a chicken. You don't know how to read maps. That's your
problem. You
problem.
grew up in North Kildonan. What's wrong with North Kildonan?
I don't like the business.
But stop on McLeod.
But I waited, and I got a trip.
I
got an address. This girl, she wanted to go to a party in North End. So we went down, Redwood up Main, went to party. Fine, let her off. Then I went back to my part of town. Don't blame the North End either, but we'll get into that later. So about 5 hours later, at 3 in the morning, what happens? I have a trip that ends in the North End.
I wasn't going to wait around there for a trip, but it was kind of busy. So I checked the meter, the computer. What do you know? There's a trip at this address. Looks familiar. Maybe it's a good trip. It was a good memory sort of thing. You know, it had been a busy night. Went and checked it out. Sure enough, it's the same girl going back to the address in North Kildonan. And she must have thought, she was a pretty young girl, you know. First night taking a cab. She must have thought I was the only taxi driver in the city.
Right. I had that happen to me. What's that restaurant in Pembina Highway near the Sal's?
Which Sal's?
Opposite Pembina Stafford.
Oh, the Round
Table.
The Round Table.
800 Pembina.
Okay. I had the same people. 3 trips in one night. Seriously. You know, and they were all short trips. They were all short trips, and it was really unbelievable.
Yeah. How unbelievable was it?
How unbelievable was it? No, they said, but we had you before. I said, yeah, I know.
I'm the only one working tonight.
Yeah, I am Winnipeg 400 cabs. Here I am.
They all
it
look
was
the
amazing.
same, that's all.
But you know, you're talking about that matter, the addresses.
No,
the fact is, and we were,
Let the man speak.
and we were talking earlier about, you know, the whole question about recognizing fares. Particularly when you work nights, you don't see people's faces, you hear them talk, but there isn't that much. I mean, if you see somebody 3 months or 6 months later, do you know if you've had them in the cab? The memory, the addresses, that's what you key on. Somebody says, take me to 673, blah, blah. You say, gee, somebody went there just last month. Then you take a look and you say, you know, do you recognize them, or is it a friend of theirs or something like that? But the addresses always stay with you.
But how many times did the customer say, I know you, I've had you before?
let me tell you a story.
And they've never seen you before. They start telling you the story about this trip, and you know it wasn't you there.
And it's some facial feature.
May I tell a story about a facial feature, or would I be out of turn?
All right, while he's telling the story,
Let's cut the,
Okay, here's the story.
facial feature.
Okay, it's back to the old days of the radio. Sunday morning. The dispatcher is wild because he cannot get a trip out on Higgins Avenue. All right? So, no, everyone's refusing it. No, I'm too far from there. Everyone's got an excuse. No one is going to take the trip on Higgins Avenue. So I say, all right, one, you know, the guy says, I said, I'll get Higgins Avenue for you. The guy's, you know, like, oh boy, and I know for the rest of the day I'm going to get the best trips in the business, right? So
You paid
I
your dues,
drive
Ed. You paid your
under the Salter Street Bridge. I'm going down Higgins Avenue. I've got this address. I stop. Here comes a couple of guys. Sunday morning. They've obviously been drinking. You know? No.
How did you know
right?
that?
No. How do I know that? Well, it took them about an hour and a half to get to the back door. But they get into the car, and here I am. They give me an address, and fine, I know how to get there. I start. Here's the guy. He says, hey, driver. You know, and here you are. It's a bad mood. It's Sunday morning. Yeah. You know how it is, eh? Yeah. I know you. So I go, yeah, okay, all right. You know, keep on driving. A few minutes later, there's dead silence in between. A few minutes later, hey, driver. Yeah. You want to know how I know you? So by this time, okay. How do you know me?
You'll bite.
Silence for a while. I had you before.
Makes sense, Ed.
So, right.
Yeah. I had that
So,
myself.
yeah, right. I'm sure we all have. But so I'm driving along a little bit more and saying, all right. So, a few more minutes of dead silence. Hey, driver. By this time, I'm about ready to pile the car into the back of the freight train. He says, you want to know how I know you? Say, okay, for God's sake, how do you know me? You got a nose like a witch. The guy's been in my cab before. He realizes I got a nose like a witch. He's gonna spend half a morning telling me. That was great.
That was one of your most unforgettable characters.
Oh, for sure. It was a great trip.
Yeah.
I once had an old lady to a medical center, though.
You remember that one?
Yeah, it was an adventurous trip there.
Can anyone top that?
Oh, I picked up an old lady at Eaton's Donald one time.
Oh, wait a minute. What about the one from the river in Osborne safely to Wellington Crescent?
I had a
That's a
Safeway
hot
trip.
trip.
Big.
Once. Have you ever had a Safeway trip?
I had her,
Sam?
yeah.
Did you ever have the airport to the International Inn? Oh, there's a
Let's
trip.
not get sidetracked into these
All right.
petty grievances, lads.
But there was a little old lady I picked up at Eaton's Donald one time, and she was 92.
Unforgettable character.
Laughter is
Think
the best
back.
medicine. Life's like that.
Who is your...
I can't talk out of turn, though. It's not my turn, but I do remember
See,
the
do you
guy that
have
went,
a
boom,
favorite
boom, boom,
character?
boom.
I've got a dozen of them. I've got a dozen. I've got the classy ones, and then I've got the real dirt bags. And
This is
Well,
a
let's start with
family
the
show,
classy
so
one.
oh, well, the classy ones, I was really impressed. I had a guy pick me up on a downtown street, and I was really impressed from the first time he flagged me. You know, people flag you on the street. Sometimes they kind of begging. Sometimes this. This guy absolutely expected. It didn't matter the fact that there was a cab on the street or not. This guy had the kind of self-assurance that when he went, he didn't even know there was a cab. He knew that when he went, a cab was going to pull over, and it was that simple. And it's always a pleasure to deal with somebody like that because they know exactly what they want. They get in the car, they go where they're going, they get out, and they pay the money. So me, I pull over and jump out, and he has a couple of suitcases there on the street, and I throw them in the trunk. Gives me an address in Windsor Park, and we go out there. He says, I'm going to visit my aunt for about an hour. He says, you'll wait here.
Keep the meter running?
I wasn't going to shut it off, was I?
Yeah,
What do you
like
do
those
for
tips,
an hour?
With a customer like that, I
meter
cleaned
running.
the windows and emptied the ashtrays.
Put a rose in the back.
It was a pleasure. It was a miserable hot afternoon. It was the middle of August. It was dead as a doornail. I cleaned the car for an hour. And then he came out, and then he went to the airport. And
Relating conversation all the way?
no, actually, he didn't deign to talk to a cab driver much at all.
Oh. Right.
I love those guys that
classy.
never deign to talk to you. You wouldn't understand, but my wife hates you.
Listen, it's better than some of the ones who do talk to you. I mean, the fact is, you know, particularly a lot of people come from smaller towns. They're used to dealing with everybody around them. And you come to a bigger city, there's a lot of people you just don't want to know. And in the cab, for example, you get in a lot of cases, people get in, they say, how's it going? And you'd say, fine. They say, what's your name? Well, the thing is, they want to really feel like they know you and they want to carry on a conversation. Well, basically, I'm a big city boy, and my attitude is, it's none of your business what my name is. They actually be wanting to know what my phone number is and this and that, and I don't like your kind anyways. But
Then there's the other people who like don't recognize that you're there at all, and they sit in the back seat and tell the most intimate stories about anything, and like you're sitting there just listening to it all.
Oh, I
Well,
love
yeah, that
that.
brings me to one of our viewers' questions. We had a lot of viewers mail since the first program in November, as I was saying, and some of our viewers wrote in to ask, you know, they get in a cab.
What's back there, Ed?
And the driver starts talking. Now, I know most of us are, you know, we don't talk unless spoken to, but anyway,
That's rule number one.
their question was, why do cab drivers have opinions about everything? Why do they seem to know so much about everything? Well, the fact is, I mean, so many of your customers get in and want to know, want advice,
Oh,
guidance,
yeah.
right, Ed?
They want to know how
Well,
to
I've often
proceed.
been asked. I've often been asked. Well, cab driver, I've been married 4 weeks now, and I feel like having a baby. What do I do next? And so I
Wait here in the cab. I'll go.
Didn't you deliver a baby in a taxi once?
no.
Oh, you delivered
it
a baby.
was really close. I delivered a letter. That's as close to delivering.
Listen, I had a trip from Armadale Hollows to the maternity health center where there was a couple, and they had decided they'd watched too many movies. I mean, they didn't realize that rushing a woman to a hospital in a cab, that's okay when it's like 1.5 miles, but it's not when it's 8 miles, you know.
Why didn't you go to
And
Victoria?
I don't know why they wanted to go to the Health Science
No,
Center.
gynecology.
At this point, I was just motoring, let me tell you, and it was a compromise. You know, I didn't care about the speed limits, because like every time we hit a bump in the road, and there's a few on Pembina and Stafford,
No, they
Hey.
got them all.
we're down to second intervals, you know, or whatever the are. And when the contractions get down to like 30 seconds, I'm kind of cutting across sidewalks and stuff. But it was a scary one, that
Yeah,
one.
they're either getting born or they're dying. I delivered a dead person to a hospital one time. This
Really?
Guy, yeah, he was having a heart attack, so they called a cab. I don't know why they didn't call an ambulance, and they
The guy died
threw
in
him in the
the car?
back seat, and he was dead by the time I got to the hospital.
I had a guy have.
That must have been a long time ago.
Yeah, it was about 5 years ago.
I
Well,
had a
that,
guy.
that recent. Because years and years ago, we used to have trouble with the police. Because when they'd get somebody who was like a victim of a knife fight or something, he was bleeding a lot, they didn't want to get to the cop car so that he wouldn't bleed all over the
Oh,
police
I
car, so
had
they'd
a lot
call
of
a cab
those.
for him.
Yeah.
You know, and you'd pull up and this guy's like bleeding all over, and the only reason they called a cab for him is because they didn't want him bleeding in the police car. But,
Sure, get in my cab, bleed all over the seats. That's what they're for.
Don't matter. I know the chief of upholstery in GM. No.
Yeah, a guy flagged me down by the Maryland Hotel one time, and he was just covered in blood, you know, and jumps in, and he wanted to go looking at it. Caused him this problem, so he spent the next hour, you know, touring the city looking for people that he could beat up, you know. Exciting
Did you
night.
get paid?
Exciting night for me. I kept trying to bring out excuses to get him out of my cab. Listen, I'm supposed to pick up the night driver in like half an hour. Oh, don't worry, don't worry. We'll just go and check out this one more address here, you know.
I know I had one night, actually. The guy got in. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He was one of these guys that worries you simply because he is so quiet.
No.
You know he's up to something.
He hasn't
and
passed out yet.
You really would like to know what it is, and you hope it doesn't involve you.
Yeah, right.
And he gives me an address. He finally gives me an address, and we go over to this place, and we pull up in front. He says, well, hang on a second. I have to see if anybody's here. So he knocks on the door. No answer for a while, and comes back to the cab. He says, I'll be back in a minute. Goes around the back of the house and comes back up front with he found a spare tire lying in the back lawn. And he chucks it through the window of the house. And he sits back down in the cab and he says, okay, now we'll go home. And it was one of these stories you really don't want to know. You know, it's one of those things that goes on at 4 in the morning that you really would have liked not in there. But
But you're the cab driver, so you're always there, scene of the action.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my last trips one night when I was cruising Broadway, trying to go home, but hoping for the one big trip, and boy, did I get it. Let me tell you, this guy flags me down, so I pulled over, picked him up, and much to my chagrin, he wanted to go way up to the northwest corner on Inkster Park area and pick up his girlfriend, who had left him some time earlier.
He was decade.
And he was fairly drunk and
I've heard these
menacing.
stories.
Oh, yeah.
The talk all the way there was, you know, I'm going to get her back, and you know, this and that, and oh Lord, you know, can I go home to bed now? But no. And so he was peeling off hundreds off of his billfold and offering me large amounts of money to help him rescue his girlfriend from her mother's house, where she had gone to hide from him. So we find the house. Yes. We go up the back lane, and he's trying to talk me into going up and ringing the doorbell.
You did it, eh?
But I did it. I rang the doorbell while he lurked in the shadows, and when the light came on, someone came to the window and yelled down, "Who wants there? Who wants what?" etc. I said, "We got a customer here who wants to go out with your daughter." "I'm calling the police," came the response. I said, "Listen, I got to get out of here." But no, he insisted, and he waved hundreds, and I, as you know, cab drivers will do anything for money, so I hung around.
Especially hundreds.
Yeah. Hung around till finally there was no point anymore, and I led him away. We did manage to retire to this Notre Dame and Flint cells. But
Notre Dame and...
have you got a story about that? But just a minute, before we got there, all the way back, he was pounding the meter with his fist and trying to break things in my car. He was so frustrated about it. And he was not going to pay me for the trip because I hadn't succeeded in the mission.
well, we talk about doing things for money. I
did
drove
pay.
8 cabs before, 8 years I drove cab before I finally got a case where somebody jumped in at a downtown hotel, 3:45 on a Friday afternoon, thickest part of rush hour, throws a 20 on the front seat and says, "There's another 20 if you can get me to my flight on time." "When's your flight go, mister?" We got 14 minutes.
No problem.
North Star to the Air Canada dock, 14 minutes.
I had a
I can do it in
guy
12.
from the ill-fated bus.
This was 4 on a Friday.
To the airport from, what's it called? Flyer Industries. It's all in the paper these days, you know. But anyway, these guys came out of Flyer Industries and said, "We got to catch the so-and-so flight to Edmonton. Can you get us there in 30 minutes?" "Sure," for a $50 bill, eh? You have power in a few seconds.
So anyone got any stories about the most famous person they ever had in their taxi?
Who's the most
Liberace?
famous person? You had Liberace in your car?
I had Liberace once, but I had Peter Tosh once.
I had
You're
Jerry
kidding.
Marsden of the Pacemakers.
You're kidding. I had one of the Elvis impersonators, and I thought that was great.
I had a couple of Ottawa Rough Riders last summer, and they were sort of talking like, "Oh, well," I said, "Well, what's the game going to be like tomorrow?" They were in town to play the Bombers for an exhibition game, which they lost something like, 57-4. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
the day before, they're in my cab. I said, "What's the game going to be like tomorrow?" "Oh, I guess it should be pretty good." You know, like they were like really burnt out, you know, so when I heard the score the next day, I thought, it figures.
I had a bunch of jets in my cab once, but I guess that's not very famous.
No.
I once had a call for, said, see the police car on King Edward.
Oh, I've had
Just
trips
north
like
of Ellis. And usually it's a problem. Usually, in fact, somebody's been stopped, and they're not drunk enough to really be taken down and carted away, but they're drunk enough to be told to leave their car.
Yeah.
This wasn't the case at all. It was a bunch of Winnipeg Blue Bombers. There were like 5 of them in an MG, which is a vicious abuse of an automobile. I mean, the poor darn thing, it was like practically lying on the ground groaning, you know, and the police had stopped them. I mean, there'd been 2 guys in the seats and 3 bombers on the back thing. I mean, these weren't even, you know, your average football players. These are like defensive linemen, you know, made by the same firm that did Stonehenge. And
1 million years
Stum,
BC.
no
the
politics.
police had pulled them over for vicious abuse of an automotive vehicle and had forced them to take a cab, and that was the point. I mean, it was really so atypical. Like I said, mostly it's some kind of problem with the police or whatever. In this case, they just told the guys, 2 of you can drive in that car, the rest have to take a cab.
I got a call from the RCMP one
good for
time
the
too,
business.
to go out to the perimeter highway and meet a car there or something. You know, when you get these calls from RCMP, you know, it's a little strange.
Yeah,
so I
right.
drive out there to the
Go to
perimeter highway
Headingley and get me chips and a Coke.
number 1 in perimeter. And I go out there and there's this car parked beside the road. The RCMP have already left. And there's this car parked beside the road, and 2 guys come walking over with rifles in their hands. And I think to myself, uh-oh, what am I doing here? And where's the RCMP? This was a call from the RCMP, and there's 2 guys walking towards my cab with rifles in their hands. But it turned out they were just coming back from a hunting trip, and their car had blown up on them, and they were taking a cab back
The
into
moose
town.
that they poached exploded near the truck.
So I had to take them home to their house somewhere in River Heights, and when I got there, they said, now don't tell my wife what happened to the car. She's going to be all worried. Just don't say anything, driver. Don't say anything.
Isn't that the classic line, though? And I think the
We
best
could
one I
make
expressed was
trillions
from
of dollars by squealing at people. We shouldn't even drive cab. We should just wheel on people.
I don't
with
think
a
we even
boxer.
have to talk. Any cab driver who heard me say, as I had one guy say to me perfectly, he says, he sits down in the car, kind of falls into the car, you know, and manages to pull in the door behind him. And he says, are we in trouble? I said, boy, our wife's going to give us to us, eh? He says, yeah. Enough said, right?
Yeah, those...
I always used
You
to
don't like to do one of
invent.
those.
I always used to invent, quote, the wife, right?
Of course.
The wife wants me
Some girl
separate, or what?
says, driver, stop the car. Kiss me, right? What would my wife think? You know, right? I always invent, you know, I got a wife. I've been married for 15 years. I got 18 kids. Stum, 14 kids for 15 years. Right? And so when someone says, kiss me, what would my wife think?
That reminds me of a story. Can I tell the story about how I thrilled some people at the airport? It was a busy night just before Christmas, so Friday night, you know. And I had arranged to take my cousin to the airport. This was a side trip. Don't tell the boss. So I was doing this on a busy Friday night, right before Christmas.
Television station, but
And so I got to the airport with her, and she got out, and we got the luggage out and put it on the sidewalk, and we embraced and kissed briefly for a moment. I was putting her on the plane to fly home to Vancouver for Christmas. There was people waiting on the sidewalk with their luggage, waiting to grab the cab, you know, and they all stood back. And then they were reluctant to come forward and claim me.
you were saying,
boy, do you get friendly with your customers.
reluctant. I like that word. Reluctant.
You've got a story about that cousin, too. What was that one?
Oh,
about?
yeah,
Was
that was another amazing coincidence. I picked up this girl at the airport one time, and she, I'm just talking to her. She wanted to go to the Mennonite College over in East Kildona,
Oh,
you know.
Mennonite
the Mennonite College. So,
Just off the Disraeli, you
yeah,
could
that's
have
the one. That's the one.
changed lanes.
So I found out she was from BC, and she was a nurse. Now I happened at this time to have a cousin going to this Mennonite college who had also been a former nurse, and she's from BC. So when I found out this information from this girl, I just said off the top of my head, just thought for a minute, and I just said, "So you're going to visit Becky, are you?" And she just silence from the back seat. How do you know Becky? Oh, everybody knows Becky. Now, can you imagine some girl coming from a small town in BC gets to Winnipeg and takes a cab? The first cab driver says,
And she's sitting there minding her own
small town
business.
thing, you know, I always used to love it. You'd get somebody at the bus depot who was in from a very small town or from a reservation or something. They get into the car and they close the door and say, I'm going to my cousin George's.
Yeah.
Oh, your cousin George. Which cousin George? He's the one that lives with Amy.
Oh, yeah, I know Amy.
While Amy is on...
Furby, look at that.
And I mean, like, they'd ask questions like, when's the cab service stop at night?
That's a
Okay.
great question. A great question.
Yeah.
Well,
As soon as I'm so sick and tired of you passengers that I bail out. That's when the cab service stops.
See, because like, and it's a different thing. It's like going back to the thing about people asking your name and stuff. It's a different style. You're in a bigger city, you get used to this kind of impersonal service, and that's what you want, and you want this separation between people. And I used to resent people like invading and saying, what's your name? And I never told them the truth. I mean, I always would say Jack or Fred or Tom or whatever, but I never told them the truth because, like, I didn't figure it was their business. And occasionally I'd lie. They'd say, what's your name? I'd say, Darlene. They'd say, well, that's funny. You don't look like Darlene. I said, put anybody in a cab for 7 years, they look like a cab driver. And that was fine, so I'd kid around with them and stuff. But I really didn't like that invasion at all. I know a lot of guys like talking to the customers. I really liked that real separation. When they called me driver, I was happy about that. I was glad to play my role, and they should play their role.
Well, but what about when they said, well, I used to be a cab driver once?
Everyone used to be a
Everybody
cab
used to be.
driver.
Right
Yeah.
before they ask for a favor, isn't it?
I'm
Yeah,
making
could you
a
shut the meter off
quarter-
now?
I'm making $250,000 a year. By the way,
What I
could you
used
shut
to.
that meter off at the light? And anyway, I used to drive an old Moors taxi, and they go on and on and on and on.
I know they're only 17 years old.
Right, in those days, you could make $1. That's the best story they all tell. In those days, you could make $1.
Of course, we had horses pulling our cabs in those days.
Oh, I heard a great horse story.
Oh, I knew.
You want to tell the horse or the trapper story?
Both. Okay, that's it. Camera 0 in. No, really. The thing I like about the business is that you hear people's stories. And the guy that told me the story, he said, the summer of '36, it was really, really hot. And I used to go to where the guy who had the dray horse for milk, would go for lunch. And I would unhitch the horse, take him into my backyard, and hose him down.
Hose them down.
The guy liked
Well, and we
horses
gotta hose
so
you
much,
down,
he would
though.
actually take the milkman's horse and hose it. It's a great story.
There
I
comes
could
the
listen to
taxi
that guy
noises.
for weeks.
No, no.
Yeah, they ought to hose down
Yeah.
a couple of cab drivers.
Yeah.
Who's down a government or two? That's another
Tax
program.
Well, thanks, guys, for more of those exciting cab stories. You hoses?
The audience
Oh, now what about the one about